The long-haul trucker and the vanishing hitchhiker of Route 66. The blood on Jake Morrison's hands was still warm when he saw her standing on the shoulder of Route 66, her white dress glowing like a beacon in his headlights at 3:15 in the morning. He had just buried his wife Martha under the old oak tree behind their farmhouse in Missouri, her lifeless eyes still haunting him as he fled west in his 18-wheeler loaded with stolen pharmaceuticals worth $2 million. The girl couldn't have been more than 19, her auburn hair whipping in the desert wind as she raised her thumb toward his cab, and something about her made his blood run cold, even though he had killed 3 people in the last 24 hours. Jake slammed on his brakes, the massive truck shuddering to a halt beside the ethereal figure who seemed to shimmer in the harsh glare of his headlights. He had been driving for 36 hours straight, fueled by methamphetamine and guilt, racing toward the Mexican border with a cargo that belonged to the Torino crime family, the same people who had murdered his daughter Lisa 6 months ago in Chicago. The girl outside his window tapped gently on the glass, her pale fingers leaving no mark on the surface, and when he rolled it down, she smiled with teeth, too white and perfect for someone standing alone in the Mojave Desert at this ungodly hour. Going west. She said, her voice carrying a strange echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jake nodded, unable to speak, as he stared into her eyes, which were the color of storm clouds and seemed to hold secrets older than the desert itself. She climbed into his cab with fluid grace, settling into the passenger seat as if she belonged there, her presence filling the space with the scent of jasmine and something else, something that reminded him of the funeral home where he had last seen his daughter. "Name's Jake." He managed to croak his throat dry despite the bottle of water he had been nursing for the last 100 miles. The girl smiled again, that same unsettling expression that made his skin crawl even as he found himself inexplicably drawn to her beauty. "I know who you are, Jake Morrison," she replied, and his blood turned to ice in his veins because he had given no one his real name, since leaving Missouri had paid cash for everything, had been careful to avoid cameras and witnesses. "You killed your wife Martha with a tire iron at 11:37 last night because she found out about the money you stole from Vincent Torino, the same money that's loaded in the back of this truck right now." Jake's hand moved instinctively toward the pistol tucked under his seat, but the girl's eyes flashed with an otherworldly light that froze him in place. She knew things no living person could know, details about Martha's murder that he had shared with no one, not even the priest who had given him last rites before he fled into the night. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions around them, a vast expanse of nothing, punctuated only by the occasional cactus or tumbleweed. And Jake realized with growing horror that he had not seen another vehicle on this stretch of highway for over an hour. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the truck's engine. The girl laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a graveyard, and reached over to touch his hand with fingers that felt like ice despite the desert heat. "I'm someone who's been waiting for you, Jake," she said, her grip tightening until he could feel his bones grinding together. "Someone who knows about the other bodies buried along your route. The truck stop waitress in Amarillo, the state trooper outside Gallup, all the people who got in your way as you ran from the consequences of your choices." Jake tried to pull away, but found he couldn't move, his body frozen in place as if invisible chains bound him to the driver's seat. The girl's face began to change, her beautiful features shifting and morphing into something else, something that made his sanity teeter on the edge of collapse. Her skin grew pale and translucent, revealing dark veins beneath the surface, and her perfect teeth elongated into sharp points that gleamed in the dashboard lights. "You see, Jake, this truck isn't just carrying stolen drugs." She continued, her voice now carrying the hollow echo of wind through empty spaces. "It's carrying something far more valuable, something Vincent Torino has been searching for across 3 states and would kill anyone to possess." The cargo manifest in Jake's jacket pocket felt like it was burning against his chest, though he had memorized every line weeks ago when he first conceived his desperate plan to steal from the crime family that had destroyed his life. OxyContin, fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, enough illegal substances to supply half the dealers on the West Coast. But the girl was suggesting there was something else, something he had missed in his hasty escape from the Torino warehouse in Kansas City. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice stronger now as adrenaline began to override his fear. "I know exactly what's in those boxes. I loaded everyone myself." The girl smiled again, her transformed features making the expression grotesque, and pointed toward the trailer behind them. "Did you really think Vincent Torino would trust $2 million worth of product to a simple long-haul driver without some insurance, without something to guarantee your cooperation in silence?" Jake's mind raced as he tried to process her words, to understand what she was implying about his cargo and his employer's true intentions. Vincent Torino was a man who trusted no one completely, who had built his criminal empire on paranoia and ruthless pragmatism, and Jake had always known that stealing from him was tantamount to signing his own death warrant. "He put something else in the truck," Jake said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Something I don't know about." The girl nodded, her storm cloud eyes gleaming with malevolent satisfaction. "Your daughter, Lisa, didn't die in a random gang shooting 6 months ago. Jake, she died because she discovered something she shouldn't have. Something that could have brought down the entire Torino organization." The world seemed to tilt around Jake as her words sank in, as the carefully constructed narrative he had believed about his daughter's death crumbled into dust. Lisa had been working as a bookkeeper for a construction company in Chicago, a legitimate business that supposedly had no connection to organized crime. But now Jake understood that nothing in his life had been as simple as it seemed. "She found evidence," the girl continued, her voice now carrying the weight of terrible truth. "Financial records shipping manifest communications between Vincent Torino and corrupt officials from coast to coast, everything needed to expose a drug trafficking network that spans from Mexico to Canada." Jake's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension as the full scope of his situation became clear. He had thought he was simply stealing drugs to sell on the black market, enough money to disappear and start a new life, somewhere far from the pain of losing his daughter. But instead, he had become an unwitting courier for evidence that could destroy one of the most powerful crime families in the Midwest. "The evidence is hidden in a false compartment in one of the drug boxes." The girl explained, her transformed features now fully revealed in the harsh light of the dashboard. "Vincent Torino let you steal the truck because he needed someone expendable to transport the evidence to his contact in Los Angeles, someone he could eliminate once the delivery was complete." The desert highway stretched endlessly ahead of them, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the wasteland toward a horizon that seemed to recede with every mile they traveled. Jake realized that he had been driving for hours without conscious thought, his body moving through the motions of operating the massive truck, while his mind grappled with revelations that recontextualized everything he believed about his life and his daughter's death. "You're lying," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Lisa was killed by gang members, random violence, wrong place, wrong time." The girl laughed again, that same chilling sound that seemed to echo from the depths of hell itself. "Lisa was killed by Vincent Torino's nephew Marco because she refused to give him the evidence she had gathered, because she threatened to turn it over to the FBI unless the Torino family left her alone." Jake felt something break inside his chest, a physical sensation, like his heart cracking under the weight of unbearable truth. His daughter had died trying to expose the same criminal organization he had been working for, had been murdered for her courage, while he remained ignorant of her sacrifice. And now he was inadvertently completing the mission that had cost her life. "How do you know all this?" he demanded, turning to face the creature that had once appeared to be a beautiful young woman. "What are you, some kind of demon? Some supernatural entity sent to torment me?" The girl's features shifted again, cycling through different faces, different ages, different expressions of pain and terror that Jake slowly began to recognize. He saw the truck stop waitress from Amarillo, the one he had strangled in the parking lot when she threatened to call the police about his suspicious behavior, and the state trooper from outside Gallup, the one he had shot in the head when the man pulled him over for a routine traffic stop. "I'm everyone you've killed, Jake Morrison," she said, her voice now a chorus of the dead speaking in unison. "Every life you've taken on your journey west, every soul you've sent to whatever lies beyond this world of pain and suffering. Jake's sanity finally snapped like a taut wire, the accumulated stress and guilt and horror of the last 24 hours combining with this supernatural revelation to shatter his grip on reality. He began to laugh, a high-pitched sound that bordered on hysteria as he pressed the accelerator to the floor and sent the massive truck racing through the desert night at dangerous speeds. "Then we'll all die together," he screamed, his voice echoing in the confined space of the cab. "If I'm already damned, if there's no redemption possible for what I've done, then let's finish this journey in style." The speedometer climbed past 80, past 90, past 100 miles per hour as the 18-wheeler careened down the empty highway with its cargo of drugs and evidence and the supernatural manifestation of Jake's victims. The girl beside him continued to shift and change, showing him face after face of people whose lives he had ended in his desperate flight toward the Mexican border. "You can't escape what you've done by dying, Jake," she said, her voice now carrying the authority of judgment itself. "Death is just the beginning of your real punishment, the start of an eternity spent facing the consequences of your choices." The truck's engine roared like a wounded beast as Jake pushed it beyond its design limits, the massive vehicle shuddering and groaning under the strain of excessive speed. Warning lights began to flash on the dashboard, indicating dangerous levels of heat and pressure in the engine compartment, but Jake ignored them all as he focused on the road ahead and the promise of oblivion it represented. "Maybe you're right," he shouted over the mechanical noise. "But at least I'll take Vincent Torino's drugs and evidence with me. At least I'll deprive him of whatever he was planning to accomplish with this delivery." The girl smiled one final time, her features settling into a face Jake recognized, but had tried to forget the face of his daughter Lisa, as she had appeared in life young and beautiful and full of hope for the future. "Dad," she said in Lisa's voice, "you still don't understand what's really happening here." Jake's foot moved instinctively toward the brake pedal as he stared at the impossible sight of his dead daughter sitting beside him in the cab of his truck. Lisa looked exactly as she had the last time he saw her alive, wearing the blue dress she had worn to her college graduation, her dark hair falling in gentle waves around her shoulders. "Lisa," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Baby, is it really you?" His daughter nodded, tears streaming down her face as she reached out to touch his cheek with fingers that felt real and warm and alive. "I've been trying to reach you for months. Dad trying to warn you about Vincent Torino and his plans, but you were so consumed with grief and anger that you couldn't hear me." Jake eased off the accelerator, allowing the truck to slow to a more manageable speed as he tried to process this latest impossible development. The desert around them seemed to shimmer and shift, as if the very fabric of reality was unstable in this place where the living and the dead could meet. "I thought you were killed by gang members," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The police said it was random violence, a robbery gone wrong." Lisa shook her head, her expression filled with sadness and something else, something that looked like pity for her father's ignorance. "The police were paid to say that Dad paid by Vincent Torino to cover up the real reason I died." The truth hit Jake like a physical blow, doubling him over the steering wheel as he fought to control the massive truck on the empty highway. His daughter had been murdered by the same man he had been working for, killed for trying to expose crimes that Jake had unknowingly participated in for months before her death. "I was gathering evidence for the FBI." Lisa continued, her voice gentle, but filled with urgent purpose. "Financial records, shipping logs, recordings of phone conversations between Vincent Torino and his associates in law enforcement and government." Jake felt bile rise in his throat as he realized the full scope of his unwitting complicity in his daughter's murder. Every load he had hauled for the Torino organization, every delivery he had made without asking questions, had contributed to the criminal enterprise that ultimately cost Lisa her life. "The evidence is in the truck right now," he said, the words coming out as a croak. "Hidden in one of the drug boxes waiting to be delivered to Vincent Torino's contact in Los Angeles." Lisa nodded, her eyes bright with tears, and something that might have been hope. "But it doesn't have to be delivered to them, Dad. You can still choose to do the right thing to honor my memory by finishing what I started." Jake stared at his daughter, at this impossible manifestation of love and redemption in the midst of his personal hell, and felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was dead forever. For months, He had been consumed with grief and rage, focused only on revenge against the criminals who had destroyed his family. But now he saw a different path, a way to transform his pain into something meaningful. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice stronger now, despite the tears streaming down his face. "How can I make this right?" Lisa smiled, the expression lighting up her face with the same joy Jake remembered from her childhood, from birthday parties and Christmas mornings, and all the small moments that had made his life worth living before tragedy struck. "Turn the truck around. Dad, take the evidence to the FBI field office in Phoenix. Tell them everything you know about Vincent Torino's operation." The desert highway stretched empty in both directions, offering Jake a choice between continuing toward his original destination and certain death, or turning back toward an uncertain future that might include redemption. He thought about Martha, about the terrible thing he had done to his wife in a moment of panic and rage, and wondered if there was any path forward that didn't lead to damnation. "I killed Martha." He confessed, the words tearing from his throat like pieces of his soul. "I murdered your mother when she found out about the money I stole, beat her to death with a tire iron, and buried her in the backyard." Lisa's expression didn't change. Her eyes still filled with love and compassion, despite the terrible truth her father had just revealed. "I know, Dad. I was there when it happened. I tried to stop you, but you couldn't see me or hear me." Jake's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, his body convulsing with sobs as the full weight of his actions crashed over him like a tsunami of guilt and self-loathing. He had killed the two most important people in his life, had destroyed his family through his own selfishness and cowardice. And now he was being offered a chance at redemption by the daughter whose death had started his downward spiral. "How can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the truck's engine. "How can you still love me after everything I've done?" Lisa reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and real, and filled with the unconditional love he remembered from her childhood. "Because you're my father, and because I know there's still good in you, still a chance for you to choose love over hate, justice over revenge." The truck rolled slowly down the empty highway as Jake wrestled with the most important decision of his life. Behind him lay a trail of violence and death, the bodies of innocent people whose only crime had been crossing his path during his flight from consequences. Ahead lay either more violence and certain destruction, or the possibility of redemption through sacrifice and truth. "If I turn myself in, they'll execute me," he said, his voice hollow with despair. "I'll die for what I've done to Martha and the others." Lisa squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears and something that looked like pride. "Maybe, Dad, but you'll die for the right reasons. You'll die trying to honor my memory and protect other innocent people from Vincent Torino's crimes." Jake thought about the waitress in Amarillo, about her terrified face in the moments before he strangled her, about the state trooper in Gallup, who had a picture of his own daughter taped to his dashboard. These people had died because of his selfishness and cowardice, because he had chosen his own survival over their lives, and their deaths would haunt him for whatever time remained to him. "I can't bring them back," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I can't undo what I've done to Martha or to you or to all the others." Lisa nodded, her expression filled with understanding and compassion. "No, Dad, you can't change the past, but you can still choose what happens next. You can still decide whether your story ends with more death or with justice and truth." The desert around them began to lighten as dawn approached the darkness, giving way to the pale pink and orange hues of sunrise over the Mojave. Jake had been driving for over 40 hours now, his body sustained by drugs and adrenaline and the supernatural encounter with his daughter, but he knew his strength was failing and his time was running out. "Vincent Torino will kill me if I betray him," he said, though the words sounded weak even to his own ears. "He has people everywhere, in law enforcement, in government. He'll find me no matter where I hide." Lisa's grip on his hand tightened, her eyes flashing with something that might have been anger or determination. "Let him try, Dad. Let him come for you while you're surrounded by FBI agents and federal prosecutors. Let him expose himself, trying to silence the truth about his crimes." Jake felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth that he hadn't experienced since Lisa's death, a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for months. His daughter was right. There was still a choice to be made, still a way to transform his pain and guilt into something meaningful and redemptive. The evidence, he said, his voice stronger now. Do you know which box it's hidden in? Lisa smiled, her face radiant with hope and love. Box number 17, the one marked as containing OxyContin, but actually filled with financial records and digital storage devices, everything needed to bring down Vincent Torino's entire organization. Jake began to slow the truck, looking for a place to turn around on the empty highway. The sun was rising behind them now, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and red, and he felt as if he was seeing the world clearly for the first time in months. Will you stay with me? He asked his daughter, afraid that she might disappear now that he had made his decision. Will you be there when I face whatever comes next? Lisa's smile grew even brighter, her eyes shining with love and pride, and something that might have been peace. I'll be with you always, Dad, in your heart and in your memories, and in the good you choose to do with whatever time you have left. Jake found a wide spot in the highway and began the complex process of turning his 18-wheeler around the massive truck, moving slowly and carefully in the growing daylight. As he completed the turn and began heading back east toward Phoenix and the FBI field office, he felt Lisa's presence beside him grow stronger, more real, as if his decision to choose justice over self-preservation had somehow made their connection more solid. There's something else you need to know, Lisa said as they gained speed on the eastbound lanes. Vincent Torino isn't just a drug dealer. He's part of something much bigger, a network of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. Jake's blood ran cold as he processed this latest revelation. He had thought he was dealing with a regional crime boss, a man whose influence extended across a few states at most. But Lisa was describing something far more sinister and far-reaching. What kind of network? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Lisa's expression grew grave, her eyes reflecting knowledge that seemed too terrible for someone so young to possess. Human trafficking, Dad. Women and children stolen from their families and sold into slavery, a business that generates billions of dollars and requires protection from law enforcement and politicians at every level. The truck seemed to grow cold around them, despite the rising sun, as if the very air had been poisoned by the evil Lisa was describing. Jake had known that Vincent Torino was a criminal, had suspected that the man was involved in various illegal enterprises, but he had never imagined anything as monstrous as what his daughter was revealing. The evidence in Box 17 doesn't just document drug trafficking. Lisa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. It includes financial records showing payments to judges and prosecutors, and police chiefs shipping manifests for human cargo communications between Torino and his associates about specific victims. Jake felt sick, his stomach churning as he realized the full scope of the evil he had unknowingly served for months before Lisa's death. Every load he had hauled, every delivery he had made, had contributed to an organization that treated human beings as commodities to be bought and sold. How many victims? He asked, his voice cracking with emotion. Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she answered. Hundreds, Dad, maybe thousands over the years. Women and children who disappear without a trace and end up in brothels and sweatshops and private homes where they're treated worse than animals. The highway ahead shimmered in the morning heat, the asphalt looking like a river of molten metal flowing toward a horizon that seemed impossibly distant. Jake pushed the truck to its maximum safe speed, driven by a desperate need to reach the FBI field office in Phoenix before Vincent Torino realized that his courier had betrayed him. They'll be watching for me, he said, scanning the road ahead for signs of surveillance or ambush. Torino's people, they'll try to stop me before I can reach the FBI. Lisa nodded, her expression grim but determined. That's why we need to be smart about this, Dad. Why we need to think like the criminals we're trying to stop. Jake felt a strange sense of comfort in the pronoun his daughter had used, the implication that they were working together, despite the impossibility of her presence beside him. Whether she was real, or a manifestation of his guilty conscience, or something else entirely, he no longer cared. She was helping him find a path toward redemption, and that was all that mattered. What do you suggest? He asked, his eyes constantly moving between the road ahead and his mirrors, watching for signs of pursuit. Lisa was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the desert landscape rushing past the truck's windows. There's a truck stop about 50 miles ahead, a place where you can park safely and call the FBI without being seen. Jake knew the truck stop she meant a massive complex just off Interstate 40 that served as a hub for long-haul drivers crossing the Southwest. It would be crowded even at this early hour, filled with trucks and cars and travelers who could provide cover for his phone call to federal authorities. "What if they don't believe me?" he said, voicing the fear that had been growing in his mind since he decided to turn himself in. "What if they think I'm just a desperate criminal trying to reduce my sentence by making up stories about corruption?" Lisa turned to face him, her expression fierce with determination and love. "Then you show them the evidence, Dad. You make them look at the financial records and the shipping manifests and the communications that prove everything you're telling them." The truck stop appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its towering signs and sprawling parking lots offering the promise of sanctuary and the opportunity to complete his mission of redemption. Jake felt his heart racing as he prepared to make the phone call that would either save innocent lives or seal his own doom. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the truck's engine. Lisa reached out and touched his face, her fingers warm and real and filled with the love he remembered from her childhood. "I know, Dad, but sometimes being scared is what makes us brave. Sometimes fear is what drives us to do the right thing, even when it costs us everything." Jake pulled into the truck stop and found a parking space near the back of the lot, away from the main buildings, but still visible to the security cameras that would document his presence. He turned off the engine and sat in the sudden silence, his hands shaking as he reached for his cell phone. "The FBI field office in Phoenix." Lisa said, her voice gentle but urgent. "Ask for Agent Sarah Chen. She's been investigating Vincent Torino for 2 years, and she'll know what to do with the evidence." Jake dialed the number with trembling fingers, his heart pounding as he waited for someone to answer. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered with the standard FBI greeting. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Phoenix Field Office. How may I direct your call?" Jake took a deep breath and looked at his daughter, drawing strength from her presence beside him. "I need to speak with Agent Sarah Chen. It's about Vincent Torino, and I have evidence of his crimes." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then the sound of typing and muffled voices in the background. "Please hold while I transfer you to Agent Chen's office." The hold music seemed to last forever, though Jake knew it was probably only a few seconds. He kept his eyes on the entrance to the truck stop, watching for any sign of Vincent Torino's men or law enforcement officers who might have been sent to intercept him. "Agent Chen speaking," a crisp voice said, cutting through his anxiety. "I understand you have information about Vincent Torino." Jake's voice caught in his throat, the enormity of what he was about to do suddenly overwhelming him. Once he spoke, there would be no going back, no way to undo his confession or protect himself from the consequences of his crimes. "My name is Jake Morrison," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been hauling loads for Vincent Torino for 8 months, and I have evidence that could bring down his entire organization." There was silence on the other end of the line, then Agent Chen's voice, sharper now, with interest and urgency. "What kind of evidence, Mr. Morrison?" Jake looked at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly, her eyes bright with pride and hope. "Financial records, shipping, manifest, digital storage devices, everything hidden in a truck full of stolen drugs that I'm supposed to deliver to Los Angeles." "Where are you now?" Agent Chen asked, her voice professional, but with an undertone of excitement that suggested she understood the significance of what Jake was offering. Jake gave her the location of the truck stop and a description of his vehicle, then waited while she coordinated with local law enforcement and other federal agents. He could hear voices in the background, people moving with purpose and urgency, and he realized that his phone call had set in motion events that would either destroy Vincent Torino's criminal empire or get Jake killed in the process. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Chen said, her voice returning to the phone, "I'm sending a team to your location now, but I need you to understand that you're in serious danger." Jake looked out at the desert surrounding the truck stop, at the vast emptiness that could hide any number of threats, and nodded, even though the agent couldn't see him. "I know, but I can't run anymore. I can't keep living with what I've done." "What have you done?" Agent Chen asked, her voice gentle but probing. Jake closed his eyes and felt Lisa's hand on his shoulder, her touch giving him the courage to confess his crimes to a federal agent. I killed my wife when she found out about the money I stole from Vincent Torino, and I killed 2 other people while running from the consequences. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like eternity. Then, Agent Chen's voice returned professional and measured. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to read you your rights, and then we're going to talk about everything that's happened and everything you know about Vincent Torino's operations. As Agent Chen recited the Miranda warning, Jake felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in months, he was telling the truth to someone who could do something about it, someone who could use his confession and his evidence to protect other innocent people from Vincent Torino's crimes. Do you understand your rights as I've explained them to you? Agent Chen asked. Jake looked at Lisa, who smiled and nodded, her face radiant with love and approval. Yes, I understand, and I waive my right to an attorney. I want to tell you everything I know right now, before Vincent Torino realizes what's happening. Agent Chen's team arrived at the truck stop within 20 minutes. A convoy of black SUVs that surrounded Jake's 18-wheeler with military precision. Jake watched them approach through his mirrors. Federal agents in tactical gear, spreading out to secure the area while others moved toward his cab with weapons drawn but not aimed. Stay calm, Dad, Lisa said, though her image seemed to be growing fainter as the reality of law enforcement closed in around them. You're doing the right thing, you're honoring my memory and protecting innocent people. Agent Chen approached the driver's side door, a middle-aged Asian woman with intelligent eyes and an air of competence that immediately put Jake at ease. She was flanked by 2 other agents, both armed, but with their weapons holstered, their body language suggesting caution rather than aggression. Mr. Morrison, Agent Chen called out, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle slowly with your hands visible. Jake opened the door and climbed down from the cab, his legs shaky from exhaustion and adrenaline. As his feet touched the pavement, he felt Lisa's presence fade completely, her voice becoming a whisper in his mind rather than a physical presence beside him. Thank you, Dad, her voice echoed in his thoughts. I love you, and I'm proud of you for choosing to do the right thing. Agent Chen approached him with professional caution, her eyes scanning his face and body language for signs of deception or violence. Are you armed, Mr. Morrison? Jake nodded and slowly reached under his jacket to retrieve the pistol he had been carrying since leaving Missouri. He handed it to Agent Chen. Grip first, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. That's the weapon I used to kill the state trooper in New Mexico, he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his confession. You'll find his blood and fingerprints on it, along with evidence of the other crimes I've committed. Agent Chen secured the weapon and nodded to her team, who began the process of searching Jake and securing the truck that contained Vincent Torino's drugs and evidence. Jake submitted to the search without resistance, his mind focused on Lisa's final words and the knowledge that he was finally doing something to honor her memory. The evidence you mentioned, Agent Chen said as her team placed Jake in handcuffs. Where exactly is it located? Jake looked toward the trailer of his truck, where federal agents were beginning to unload boxes of illegal drugs under the supervision of forensic specialists. Box number 17, the one marked as containing OxyContin. It has a false bottom with financial records and digital storage devices. Agent Chen spoke into her radio, directing her team to the specific box Jake had identified. Within minutes, they had located the hidden compartment and extracted its contents, a collection of documents and electronic devices that would prove to be the key to dismantling Vincent Torino's criminal empire. Mr. Morrison. Agent Chen said, her voice filled with a mixture of respect and sadness. What you've done here today is going to save a lot of lives, but you understand that you're going to face serious consequences for your own crimes. Jake nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent from his life for months. I know, and I accept whatever punishment I deserve, as long as the evidence I've provided can be used to stop Vincent Torino and his organization. As the federal agents transported Jake away from the truck stop in one of their black SUVs, he caught a glimpse of Lisa in the reflection of the window, her face serene and beautiful as she watched her father finally choose justice over self-preservation. She mouthed the words, "I love you," and then faded away, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and the knowledge that he had finally done something worthy of her memory. The FBI field office in Phoenix was a fortress of glass and steel, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the desert landscape that surrounded it. Jake was processed through the building's security systems and eventually found himself in an interview room facing Agent Chen across a metal table with recording equipment and surveillance cameras documenting every word he spoke. "Let's start at the beginning," Agent Chen said, her voice professional but not unkind. "Tell me how you first became involved with Vincent Torino's organization." Jake took a deep breath and began to tell his story, starting with his daughter's murder and his subsequent descent into grief and rage. He described his decision to work for the Torino organization as a long-haul driver, his growing suspicions about the true nature of his cargo, and his eventual discovery that Lisa had been killed for trying to expose the same crimes he was unknowingly facilitating. Agent Chen listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression growing more grim as Jake revealed the scope of Vincent Torino's criminal activities. The financial records and digital devices from Box 17 were spread across a separate table being examined by forensic accountants and computer specialists who confirmed Jake's claims about the evidence they contained. The human trafficking operation. Agent Chen said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Can you provide any details about specific victims or locations?" Jake shook his head, his face filled with shame and regret. "I was just a driver. I hauled loads without asking questions. I didn't want to know what was really in the trucks or where it was going." Agent Chen nodded, her expression understanding, despite the horror of what Jake was describing. "The evidence you've provided includes shipping manifests and financial records that will help us identify victims and locations. It's more than we've been able to gather in 2 years of investigation." The interview continued for hours, Jake providing every detail he could remember about his time working for the Torino organization. He described routes he had driven, warehouses he had visited, people he had met, all the seemingly innocent interactions that now took on sinister meaning in light of what he knew about Vincent Torino's true business. "There's something else," Jake said, as the afternoon wore on, his voice hoarse from talking. "My daughter Lisa, she mentioned that Vincent Torino has people in law enforcement, judges and prosecutors who are being paid to protect his operations." Agent Chen leaned forward, her eyes sharp with interest. "Did she provide any names, any specific information about corrupt officials?" Jake closed his eyes and tried to remember Lisa's exact words from their supernatural encounter on the desert highway. "She said the evidence would show payments to judges and prosecutors and police chiefs, but she didn't give me specific names." Agent Chen made notes and spoke quietly into her radio, coordinating with other agents who were analyzing the financial records from Box 17. Jake could see the excitement in her eyes, the realization that they had stumbled onto something far bigger than a simple drug trafficking case. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Chen said, setting down her pen and looking directly into Jake's eyes. "I need you to understand that what you've given us today is going to change everything, not just for Vincent Torino, but for law enforcement across the entire Southwest." Jake felt a mixture of pride and terror at her words. He was proud that his decision to come forward might save innocent lives, but terrified of what Vincent Torino would do when he realized that his courier had betrayed him. "He'll try to kill me," Jake said, voicing the fear that had been growing in his mind throughout the interview. "Vincent Torino, he'll want revenge for what I've done." Agent Chen nodded grimly. "That's why you're going into federal protective custody immediately after this interview, and why we're going to move fast to arrest Torino and his associates before they have a chance to retaliate." As if summoned by her words, another agent entered the interview room and whispered something in Agent Chen's ear. Her expression grew tense, and she excused herself for a private conversation in the hallway. Jake sat alone in the interview room, watching through the one-way mirror as federal agents moved with increasing urgency through the building. Agent Chen returned after several minutes, her face grim with bad news. "Mr. Morrison, we've just received word that Vincent Torino's men are mobilizing across 3 states. They know you've betrayed them, and they're looking for you." Jake's blood ran cold as he processed this information. Somehow, despite all their precautions, word of his cooperation with federal authorities had reached Vincent Torino within hours of his surrender at the truck stop. How did they find out so fast? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Agent Chen's expression was troubled as she answered. We believe there's a leak in law enforcement, someone on Vincent Torino's payroll who's been feeding him information about our investigation. The corrupt officials Lisa had mentioned. Jake realized they weren't just protecting Vincent Torino's past crimes. They were actively helping him evade justice in the present. The evidence in Box 17 had revealed the scope of the corruption, but it had also alerted the corrupt officials to the danger they faced. What happens now? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Agent Chen sat back down across from him, her expression determined despite the complications they faced. Now we move faster than they do. We use the evidence you've provided to obtain warrants and make arrests before Vincent Torino can eliminate witnesses or destroy evidence. Over the next several hours, Jake watched through the interview room's window as the FBI field office transformed into a command center for what Agent Chen described as the largest organized crime investigation in the region's history. Agents came and went with increasing frequency, their faces tense with the urgency of a race against time. Agent Chen returned periodically to update Jake on their progress and to ask additional questions about his knowledge of Vincent Torino's operations. With each conversation, Jake learned more about the scope of the criminal enterprise he had unknowingly served and the magnitude of the evil that his evidence might help to stop. We've identified over 300 potential victims of the human trafficking operation, Agent Chen told him during one of these updates. Women and children who disappeared over the past 5 years, all matching the patterns described in the shipping manifests you provided. Jake felt sick as he processed this information, realizing that every load he had hauled for the Torino organization might have contributed to the suffering of innocent people. The guilt was overwhelming, but Lisa's voice echoed in his memory, reminding him that he still had a choice about what happened next. Have you found any of them? He asked, hoping against hope that some of the victims might still be alive and rescuable. Agent Chen's expression brightened slightly. We've located 2 facilities in Arizona and Nevada that match descriptions in the financial records, and we're coordinating with local law enforcement to conduct simultaneous raids. As night fell over, Phoenix Jake was moved to a secure holding facility within the federal building, a small room with a bed and basic amenities where he could rest while remaining under protective custody. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Martha and Lisa and all the choices that had led him to this moment. Sometime after midnight, he was awakened by the sound of Agent Chen's voice in the hallway outside his room. She was speaking urgently into her radio, coordinating what sounded like a major law enforcement operation. Jake pressed his ear to the door and caught fragments of the conversation. All units in position, Agent Chen was saying. Remember, Vincent Torino is considered extremely dangerous and will likely resist arrest authorization for deadly force is granted if necessary. Jake realized that the raids were beginning, that federal agents across multiple states were moving simultaneously to arrest Vincent Torino and dismantle his criminal organization. The evidence he had provided was being used to save lives and bring justice to those who had been victims of Torino's crimes. Agent Chen appeared at his door an hour later, her face showing the strain of the night's operations, but also a glimmer of satisfaction. We got him, she said simply. Vincent Torino is in custody, along with 12 of his key associates and 3 corrupt law enforcement officials. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by a more complex mixture of emotions. Justice was being served, but he knew that his own reckoning was still to come, that he would have to face the consequences of the murders he had committed during his flight from Missouri. What about the victims? He asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. Agent Chen's smile grew broader. We rescued 47 people from the facilities in Arizona and Nevada, mostly young women who had been trafficked from Mexico and Central America. Some of them had been missing for years. Jake began to cry, his body shaking with sobs of relief and grief, and something that might have been redemption. The evidence he had provided, Lisa's sacrifice, Martha's death, all the terrible events that had brought him to this moment, they had resulted in the rescue of dozens of innocent people who might otherwise have remained lost forever. There's something else, Agent Chen said, her voice gentle. We found records indicating that your daughter Lisa had been working with an FBI informant for months before her death She was part of an ongoing investigation into Vincent Torino's organization. Jake looked up through his tears, trying to process this latest revelation about his daughter's secret life. She was working with you. Agent Chen shook her head. Not directly with me, but with another agent who was killed in a car accident 3 months after Lisa's murder. An accident we now believe was arranged by Vincent Torino to eliminate a threat to his organization. The pieces of the puzzle continued to fall into place, revealing a conspiracy that reached deeper into law enforcement and government than Jake had ever imagined. Lisa had been part of a larger effort to expose Vincent Torino's crimes, an effort that had cost her life and the life of the FBI agent she had been working with. She was a hero. Agent Chen said, her voice filled with respect and admiration. Your daughter died trying to protect innocent people from monsters like Vincent Torino, and now her sacrifice has finally resulted in justice. Jake felt Lisa's presence again, not the supernatural manifestation he had experienced on the desert highway, but something quieter and more peaceful, a sense that his daughter was at rest, knowing that her mission had been completed. The evidence she had died trying to gather had finally been used to destroy the criminal organization that had taken her life. What happens to me now? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Agent Chen's expression grew somber. You'll be charged with 3 counts of murder along with theft and various other crimes related to your flight from Missouri. But your cooperation in this investigation will be taken into account during sentencing. Jake nodded, accepting the reality of his situation, with a calmness that surprised him. He had committed terrible crimes, had taken innocent lives in his panic and desperation, and he would have to face the consequences of those actions. But he had also chosen to do the right thing in the end, had honored his daughter's memory by helping to bring down the criminals who had killed her. The legal proceedings that followed were lengthy and complex, involving multiple jurisdictions and hundreds of pieces of evidence. Jake testified before grand juries and in preliminary hearings, providing details about Vincent Torino's organization that helped prosecutors build their cases against dozens of defendants. Vincent Torino himself proved to be everything Jake had imagined, and worse, a cold-blooded sociopath who had built his criminal empire on the suffering of innocent people. During his trial, evidence presented by prosecutors revealed the full scope of his crimes, including the murders of Lisa Morrison and FBI agent David Rodriguez, who had been Lisa's handler in the investigation. Jake watched from the witness stand as Vincent Torino was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his criminal organization dismantled forever by the evidence Lisa had died trying to gather. The corrupt law enforcement officials who had protected Torino received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years, their careers and reputations destroyed by their association with organized crime. The human trafficking victims rescued during the raids were provided with medical care and counseling. Many of them eventually reunited with families who had given up hope of ever seeing them again. Jake received letters from some of these victims thanking him for his role in their rescue, though he struggled to accept their gratitude given the crimes he had committed. His own trial was held 6 months after Vincent Torino's conviction in a federal courthouse in Missouri, where he faced charges for Martha's murder and the killings he had committed during his flight west. Jake pled guilty to all charges, refusing to mount a defense that might minimize his responsibility for the deaths he had caused. The prosecutor acknowledged Jake's cooperation in the Torino investigation during the sentencing hearing, noting that his testimony had been crucial to the successful prosecution of the criminal organization. Jake's defense attorney argued for leniency based on his client's grief over his daughter's murder and his ultimate decision to seek justice rather than personal gain. Jake was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, a sentence that took into account both the severity of his crimes and his cooperation with federal authorities. As the judge pronounced his sentence, Jake felt a sense of peace that had been absent from his life since Lisa's death, knowing that he had finally faced the consequences of his actions. Prison was a harsh environment filled with violence and desperation, but Jake found unexpected solace in the routine and structure of incarcerated life. He spent his days working in the prison library, helping other inmates with legal research and correspondence, finding purpose in small acts of service to others. Years passed slowly behind bars, marked by the changing seasons visible through the barred windows of his cell. Jake received occasional updates about the continuing impact of his testimony against Vincent Torino's organization, learning that prosecutors had used the evidence to pursue related cases across multiple states and countries. He also received letters from Martha's sister, who had initially refused to speak to him after learning about his crimes, but eventually came to understand the complex circumstances that had led to her sister's death. She visited him once 3 years into his sentence, and they spoke for hours about Martha and Lisa and the family they had all lost to violence and tragedy. Jake began writing his own story during his 5th year in prison, documenting the events that had led from his daughter's murder to his cooperation with federal authorities. He wrote about the supernatural encounter with Lisa on Route 66, about the choice between revenge and justice, about the price of redemption in a world where good and evil were often impossible to distinguish. The manuscript grew to hundreds of pages over the course of several years, becoming both a confession and a cautionary tale about the consequences of choosing hatred over love. Jake shared portions of it with other inmates, many of whom had their own stories of loss and poor choices, and found that his experiences resonated with men who had also lost everything to violence and crime. During his 10th year in prison, Jake received word that one of the human trafficking victims rescued during the Torino raids had written a book about her experiences, dedicating it to Lisa Morrison and the other heroes who had helped bring her captors to justice. Jake read the book with tears streaming down his face, finally understanding the full impact of his daughter's sacrifice and his own decision to honor her memory. He was granted parole after serving 18 years of his sentence, released into a world that had changed dramatically during his incarceration. Technology had advanced, social media had transformed human communication, and the landscape of crime and law enforcement had evolved in ways that made his story feel like ancient history. Jake moved to a halfway house in Denver, where he worked as a counselor for men transitioning from prison back to civilian life. His experiences with grief and redemption, his understanding of the psychology of violence and the possibility of change, made him uniquely qualified to help others navigate the challenging process of rebuilding their lives after incarceration. He never married again, never tried to replace the family he had lost through his own actions and the crimes of others. Instead, he dedicated his remaining years to service, speaking at schools and community centers about the consequences of violence, the importance of choosing justice over revenge, and the power of truth to bring healing to broken communities. On quiet evenings in his small apartment, Jake would sometimes feel Lisa's presence again, not the dramatic, supernatural manifestation he had experienced on Route 66, but a gentle sense of her approval and love. He would talk to her photograph on his mantle, sharing news of the people he had helped and the small ways he was trying to honor her memory. Jake Morrison died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, 23 years after his release from prison. His funeral was attended by dozens of former inmates whose lives he had touched, by families of human trafficking victims who had been rescued because of his testimony, and by law enforcement officers who respected his ultimate choice to serve justice rather than self-interest. Agent Sarah Chen, now retired from the FBI, delivered a eulogy that summarized Jake's complex legacy. "He was a man who committed terrible crimes in a moment of desperation and fear," she said, "but he was also a man who chose to do the right thing when it mattered most, who honored his daughter's sacrifice by helping to save innocent lives." Lisa Morrison was buried next to her parents in a small cemetery outside Denver. Her grave marked with a simple stone that read, "Beloved daughter, seeker of justice, light in darkness." Visitors to the cemetery often found fresh flowers on her grave, left by people whose lives had been touched by her story and her father's journey from darkness to redemption. The evidence that Jake had delivered to the FBI continued to generate prosecutions for years after Vincent Torino's conviction, leading to the dismantling of related criminal organizations across North America and Central America. The shipping manifests and financial records he had provided became the foundation for international cooperation efforts that rescued hundreds of additional trafficking victims and brought their captors to justice. Route 66, the highway where Jake had encountered his daughter's spirit and made the choice that defined the rest of his life, became a pilgrimage destination for people seeking their own paths to redemption. Travelers would stop at the truck stop where he had surrendered to federal authorities, many of them carrying their own burdens of guilt and searching for the courage to make difficult moral choices. The story of the long-haul trucker and the Vanishing Hitchhiker became legend among drivers who traversed the desert highways of the American Southwest. Some claim to have seen a young woman in a white dress standing beside the road at night, her hand raised in greeting to those who carried heavy burdens and needed guidance toward the light. Whether these sightings were real or imagined, the story served as a reminder that redemption was always possible, that even the darkest sins could be transformed into something meaningful through the choice to serve truth and justice. Jake Morrison's journey from grief to revenge to ultimate redemption became a testament to the power of love to overcome hatred, even in the face of terrible loss and seemingly insurmountable evil. In the end, his story was not about the crimes he had committed or the people he had killed in his desperate flight from consequences. It was about the moment on a dark desert highway when he chose to listen to his daughter's voice calling him toward justice, when he decided that her memory was worth more than his own life, when he transformed his pain into purpose and his guilt into a gift to the world. The Vanishing Hitchhiker of Route 66 was never seen again after that night, when Jake Morrison chose redemption over revenge, but her presence lingered in the hearts of all who heard the story, a reminder that love transcends death, and that the dead can still guide the living toward the light if we have the courage to listen to their voices and follow their example of sacrifice and service to others.